our faith will not be tested when everything is going fine. My faith and your faith will be tested in the most difficult time.
His colleague came to our house and told us that my husband, who was in a car, well, at that point we thought it was a car accident, but later found out he was killed.
I'd just gotten home from work, and my grandfather called me and said that mom and dad had been killed in Uganda.
And I wanted the people that did the shooting to know that Jesus is different.
I felt the Holy Spirit came, and I gave my heart to Christ.
Jesus never promised his followers an easy path. In fact, he told his disciples that the world would hate them. He sent them out as sheep among wolves. Jesus' words came true in the life of the apostles, and they're still coming true today in the lives of his followers around the world. Join host Todd Nettleton as we hear their inspiring stories and learn how we can help. Right now on the Voice of the Martyrs Radio Network.
Welcome back to the Voice of the Martyrs Radio. My name is Todd Nettleton. Thank you for taking time this week to be with us. Happy New Year. I hope 2024 is a year filled with blessing for you. Last week, we began listening back to some of the most moving moments on Voice of the Martyrs Radio in 2023. If you missed it, I hope you'll go and listen to that entire episode at vomradio.net, or you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. These episodes are also an excellent way to share the ministry of VOM Radio with a friend. You can find a link at vomradio.net. Your Christian friend will get a great overview of the kinds of things that we talk about every week at VOM Radio, the amazing heroes of the faith that we get to meet. Let's begin this week by focusing on family relationships. You know, in many cultures, it is often the family that is the first source of persecution when a family member comes to know Jesus. Brother Maksud told us a moving story about coming to know Jesus as a young man, along with his brother. For years, he was afraid to tell his parents for fear of reprisals. He'll never forget the moment when his mom found out that Maksud and his brother were Christians. She forced the boys to confess to their father the thing they were most dreading.
And then he turned to us and said, "Guys, you decide to follow Jesus?" I was scaring and say, "Yes, I would like to be a follower of Jesus." Looked at my younger brother, "You too?" He said, "Yes." And he said, "Come on to me." And I came to him and he hugged me. And he said, "Thanks to God." And he said, 2 years ago, I gave my life to Christ.
Wow.
That was a moment. That was a big moment. Because my father, I see him change. I see him change a lot. I didn't know what's going with him, but he was full of love and joy. Last 2-3 years, he said, "I gave my life 2 years ago, and I didn't know how to tell you, but I was praying for you guys."
Wow.
And I will tell you, 99% of my people have known this story. They have opposite story.
Mm-hmm.
They were beaten. They were thrown away from a house. They had tons of problems. But in my case, not. But then my father says something that it was really touched me. He said, "My dear son, I can't be minister of Jesus," because his background, you know, he was a communist, and then he became an Islamic, and then he have a story back there. But he said, "That's my prayer for you and your brother and your brothers. Be a servant of Jesus. Serve to him. Love him. Follow him. He is the way, truth, and life." And that moment, I feel really support. But I knew that it will cost for me outside.
Right.
All outside cost, I will feel all of them. But at least here, I have peace. Here, I was received.
We're talking this week on Voice of the Martyrs Radio with Brother Maksud. He is from Central Asia. What about your mom? Did she come around?
My mom became believers after 10 years. She received Jesus. And today, she's more stronger than even my father that days, because she have daily relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I'm calling her to say, "How are you, Mom? Love you. Sorry that I'm so far. I cannot visit you." She said this, don't worry about us. Jesus is with us.
When a Christian is persecuted, often he or she is not the only one that suffers. When someone is killed for sharing the gospel, obviously their family suffers as well, is left behind to continue suffering. That's what happened to Sister Jane. From a young age, she wanted to go overseas to tell people about Jesus. Her husband shared that mission, and they lived and served in the Middle East for several years.
His colleague came to our house and told us that my husband, who was in a car, well, at that point we thought it was a car accident, but later found out he was killed. Definitely, I wanted to go see the body and pray that Jesus would raise him from the dead. Maybe about an hour and a half later, we were able to do that. And maybe just about 15 minutes or 20 minutes that we prayed, and then we prayed one last time and said, okay, we're going to accept whatever happens.
This sacrifice was not in vain. There has been very definite and very positive things that have happened for the kingdom because of it.
Yeah, we've heard different stories of different ones who have come to faith after realizing that he had come to this country and ultimately gave up his life for the things that he believed. It caused different ones to take a closer look at the principles and the faith that he had. And the Holy Spirit definitely was touching different ones and speaking to them. And I like to give the illustration of like a catapult. I feel like I could have lived and worked in that country my whole life and not seen the fruit that we're seeing now, and that God used my husband's death to kind of catapult his plans and purposes for that nation and for the people there. I believe that all of the people who have died for their faith, not only in that country, but in that area of the world, that God uses those things. He takes anything and everything that we can give him, and he redeems it and uses it in the best way possible. Though it wouldn't be the way we would choose, his ways are not our ways. It's amazing to see how he can use what we have to offer him.
That's Sister Jane. Her husband was martyred while sharing the gospel in the Middle East. Instead of focusing on herself and her grief and her loss, Jane is focused on how her loss is contributing to God's kingdom. That's also the focus for Susanne Geske. Her husband Tilman was killed while spreading the gospel in Turkey. The young murderers were arrested, and Susanna suddenly received public attention. She was still in shock and grief, but she asked the Lord how he wanted to use the situation.
And then there was the doorbell rang, and the media people came and said they want to talk to me. And so I sat there and prayed a really quick prayer, asking the Lord, what can I say? Because he promised to give us the words we should say. It's like the Lord spoke to me, forgive them because they don't know what they've done. And was like, oh, that was what Jesus said on the cross. So I was like, okay, if he wants for me to do this, I will do this. But this was just really obeying the words of the Lord, just obeying what he said to me. But because of this, afterwards, lots of people came to interview. And so I just said that I really forgave because Jesus forgave me, because Jesus died on the cross for me, and he forgave my sins. And then after he died on the cross, he rose again. And this is why we can have life. And then I remember the guy looked at me and said, can you explain it a bit better? So this kind of opportunities really happen.
It seems almost impossible that someone could go on national television and publicly forgive the men who murdered her husband. But with God, all things are possible, so much so that we actually aired 2 stories in 2023 about women doing exactly that. Ronnie and Anita Smith moved with their infant son to Benghazi in the days after the attack on the U.S. consulate in Libya. Ronnie was a school teacher, much loved by his students, but he was shot and killed by a group of men unhappy that he was in Libya in the name of Jesus. Here's Anita.
We wanted our lives really to glorify Jesus. And I do remember Ronnie saying before that if he could only have one person turn to Jesus with his life, that it would have been worth it. I wanted the people that did the shooting to know that Jesus is different. Jesus is a God that loves people who make mistakes and who do crime, and it's not okay what they did at all. That doesn't mean that they're freed from the consequences of it, but that Jesus teaches us to love our enemies, and that's what causes people to come to know Jesus and to come to know what the gospel is. And I just really wanted them to know, this is a horrific thing that you've done, but look at the extravagant thing that Jesus has done.
That conversation with Anita Smith was recorded at the Hearts of Fire virtual event hosted by the Voice of the Martyrs. At that event, we met 4 women who have paid a very high price for sharing their faith. You can still sign up to watch that event yourself or with a group at your church. We'll give you more details in the show notes for this week's episode at vomradio.net. You're listening to the Voice of the Martyrs Radio. We are returning to some of the most moving moments of 2023. And we just heard the stories of 2 women whose husbands were martyred for the sake of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, children can also be at risk of loss when their parents follow God's call.
Mom and Dad had always wanted to be in a more rural type setting.
This is Saul Pett.
And so they eventually got connected with a group called Here Is Life in Uganda. That group ran a school, so my parents went there to help them learn what sustainable farming looked like.
I'd just gotten home from work, and my grandfather called me and said that Mom and Dad had been killed in Uganda.
I went outside, told God I was done talking to him forever. So I wasn't going to speak to him no more until he could give me a good reason why all this would happen.
Here's Ezra Pett.
Like Saul, I had all kinds of anger. I didn't know where all my anger was from. I put God on the back burner for many years.
So this frustrated, angry kid who didn't call me very often, he calls me one day and he says, so, hey, I'm thinking I'm going to go to Uganda and I'm going to do wells.
The Aringa people needed clean water. And that's what made me get excited, because I've been in the water industry my entire adult life. So that's how the whole trip started.
When my brother said, hey, you want to go with me to Uganda? And I went, no. Sure. When are we leaving? He went there to build wells. I went there to build a relationship with my brother again. I was an angry, angry Christian. And then you get there and you start to meet these people. You don't have a choice but to stop being angry. They had so much love for our parents, and they had so much pain that they had dealt with by themselves with no support. The stories they told and the love they had and the joy that was in them, and just every day, it was extraordinary to be part of. And the love that they have for us, never having met us before, was extraordinary to me.
After going on this trip and meeting these people that I was angry with, and like Saul said, there was no way you could be angry anymore. Everything was lifted. I came home. My wife asked who I was. She's like, I'm just going to take a little bit getting used to this person that's smiling all the time and not angry. And it was a joy of things that I had lifted from pain that had finally been erased for the most part, but also having that joy of God too.
This is the Voice of the Martyrs Radio. I'm Todd Nettleton. We're looking back over 2023 and remembering some of the most moving moments that God has allowed us to share this year. You're just getting snippets of these programs today. If you want to hear the entire episode, the entire conversation, visit our website, vomradio.net, or find Voice of the Martyrs Radio wherever you listen to podcasts. Susie Childers was trained as a photographer. She now uses that experience and those skills to connect with women in countries around the world. Susie is a gospel worker with YWAM, Youth with a Mission. As she prepared to visit Nigeria not long ago, she felt the Lord leading her to collect used jewelry from friends to take with her on the trip.
So you have the north that is predominantly now Islamic by force, really, and you have the south that's more Christian, so it's safer. We're bringing widows and orphans down from the north. And you need to understand these women have nothing. They come with nothing. They have often only the clothes on their bodies. They have been displaced. Their villages are unlivable. Their husbands are dead. They lived in the bushes. So I remember I listened to the first widow sharing her heart. I wept. And then I did listen to the second one. And she stopped in the middle of her story and broke down and couldn't talk anymore because the story was too fresh. It was only a few months ago. And so she cried, and I just hugged her, and we cried together because there was nothing I could do. The Lord reminded me of this jewelry, and I suddenly knew what I had to do. So I got up, and I took a little bracelet, just grabbed one thing, and I put it on her arm, and I said to her, I want you to know that Jesus has not forgotten you. I want you to, I give you this jewelry to remind you that you are precious in the eyes of God, and that God is with you every day of your life. I had a few rings too. That was even more powerful. I gave it to them and I put it on their fingers and I said, now as your husband has died, Jesus wants to be your husband. And I want you to remember that by wearing this jewelry. And it was a powerful moment for both of us. I mean, those women, they looked at me in unbelief, right? It was such a deep moment where God really, I felt like he was getting through to the very heart of hearts. But it was also a powerful moment for me, you know, seeing how God was using a little act of kindness to touch those women's hearts and heal something that maybe words couldn't touch.
That's Susie Childers from YWAM. She has discovered the joy of finding hurting women, reminding them that they have dignity, and telling their stories. At the Voice of the Martyrs, we share a passion for giving a voice to our persecuted brothers and sisters. That's why we seek out persecuted believers. We often go to them, we remind them that they're not alone, and then we share their stories with you to encourage you, to help you pray for them. I was so grateful this year we could record an interview with a pastor from the People's Republic of China. We just called him Brother Infu, which means blessing in Chinese. We talked about how his church can continue to function, even as the restrictions against the church in China have grown tighter and tighter. Brother Infu, you mentioned the seminary. Talk to me a little bit about that training process, because you mentioned what you're doing is illegal. So this is not a above-ground seminary. This is an underground seminary. It is illegal. How do you gather people together? How long is the process? I assume they have jobs while they're doing this. So how do they balance work and studies? Just kind of talk through how the seminary process works.
Yes. Seminary used to be where American professors, they can come and visit and teach. It has become very difficult for them to come to China to train. So now the Chinese have to train up the people. So in our seminary, we focus a lot on just raising up men so that they can train up other men. And I Todd, this is another prayer. We hope that the Chinese, especially Chinese students that came over to America to attend seminary, to be educated, they have a desire to be educated in theology, in the Bible, in ministry, and to return home to China to serve. But after they come to America, they touch the ground, the soil in America. They breathe the air in America. They eat the hamburgers. They don't go back. But the calling, the burden was the house church, but they don't go back anymore. Pray that they go back. Because right now we need Chinese men from mainland China who went to study in America, educated in Greek and Hebrew, systematic theology, the Bible and ministry, to go back to the house church. Not just the comfortable life and white picket fences and maybe a little bit more comfortable life. But that's where the action is. That's where ministry is. That's where souls are lost, souls are going to hell, and there's no one to disciple. So this man, I want to speak to this Chinese, those who have gone to seminary, go back and train the men. You know the language, you know the culture. Don't stay in America. Go where the action is. It is a rewarding ministry.
That's Brother Infu, who has continued to stay in China and serve his congregation, even as the government there has made it harder and harder to function as a church. Pastor Pan and his church sensed the Lord calling them in a different direction. Instead of staying in China, they decided to seek asylum and all flee China together as one church body. We aired this interview in March while his congregation was in Thailand seeking asylum status.
Chinese Christians knows that they have to pay price for their religion. Maybe that's because that everything costs something in China.
What's going on with the legal process, and how can we pray for the next steps?
We was welcomed by the Korean church, and they treated us very well. The Korean government was kind to us, but didn't have a law for Christians.
For religious refugees, yeah.
So we came to Thailand to reply refugee to the UNHCR. So we think that it's the best way we can do. And we know that the way they treat us, the UNHCR, they are kind and they are helping us. Our case has been updated and was noticing by the UNHCR.
Because of the publicity?
I think so. After they give us a refugee status, then we'll face the asylum problem.
Resettlement.
Resettlement. There are thousands of refugees stays in Thailand waiting for asylum. And there are only 1% of them can be resettled every year. We still don't know that when we can be resettled.
It could be weeks, it could be years. I mean, there really is, you have no way of knowing how long it could be.
Yes. We have friends in America, Tyler, Texas, and they always tells the American government that they have prepared for us, just waiting for us to go there.
That's Pastor Pan from the Mayflower Church. When we recorded that interview, Pastor Pan and his congregation didn't know what their future looked like. In fact, they were thinking it could be up to 5 years that they were kind of in limbo, waiting for asylum, and there was a lot of fear that they could even be sent back to China. I'm happy to let you know that on Good Friday 2023, this congregation arrived in the United States. They are settled among supporters in Texas. As we're looking back on meaningful moments of 2023, I think that's a real highlight. This congregation launched out in faith, seeking the opportunity to worship, and the Lord orchestrated it so that they can now serve Him together in freedom. I know many VOM Radio listeners heard about that story and prayed, because I know every single week we have listeners who are writing down the prayer requests we share. They are going to the Lord in prayer on behalf of our persecuted brothers and sisters. We want to help you do that even more effectively in 2024 with a copy of the Voice of the Martyrs 2024 prayer calendar. When you make a gift of any amount to support the work of the Voice of the Martyrs, we will send you a 2024 prayer calendar as our thank you for your gift. Your gift is going to help VOM continue to serve persecuted Christians around the world. The prayer calendar is going to help you pray for persecuted Christians every single day in 2024. Just visit vomradio.net. You can make your donation online. When you make it before the end of December, we will send you that 2024 prayer calendar. vomradio.net is also where you can hear all the conversations that we have featured today. We have been highlighting some of the most moving moments from 2023, but obviously we couldn't fit in everything. So when you visit vomradio.net, you can explore all of the archives. You can hear more from all of the guests that we've heard little snippets from today. You can also find Voice of the Martyrs Radio wherever you listen to podcasts. I hope that you have a meaningful New Year's celebration. I hope you are anticipating God's work in your life in the coming year, just as we have heard how God has been working in the lives of our persecuted brothers and sisters. And I hope you'll be back with us next week. We will start out the new year looking ahead to what God has in store for Voice of the Martyrs in 2024. Please be back with us next week right here on the Voice of the Martyrs Radio Network.